By definition, an ecosystem is a community of living organisms interacting with each other and with the non-living components of their environment. Here in South Africa, vast amounts of land that used to be natural ecosystems are now under plantations. And that's why forestry has been accused by many people through the years of being a destroyer of ecosystems. But there's also another way of looking at this, as an emerging ecosystem in its own right.
It doesn't have as big an impact as people always thought it did, and the perception was that plantations wiped out biodiversity. That is now becoming clearly a wrong perception. Yes, where we're sitting, when this was a grassland, there was a whole lot of grass species and the plant species. That biodiversity is largely gone. So yes, at this scale, at the scale of the stand of trees, the impact on plant biodiversity is big. But at the scale of a landscape, it's completely different.
The fact is that even trees in a plantation are still living organisms, as opposed to the concrete jungles we built in other places. And all of Sappi's land, for example, is not just plantations.
We're not dealing with a broken landscape here, we're dealing with a new landscape, which is made up of a mosaic of trees, grasslands, riparian zones, and all sorts of things that are happening.
But this theory would only have value once we know what other living organisms interact in and use this environment.
Having looked at some of the data we've got, and I started a couple of years ago looking at a lot of bird data, and we looked at it from a biodiversity point of view, and I did a bit of an analysis of what kind of bird species are in these plantation landscapes. And it turns out you still get a lot of grassland bird species, the specialists. You get forest species, which you'd expect, and more of them, so they're more widely distributed. But you get a whole lot of new species that are kind of the woodland species or the generalists, species that have adapted to a kind of a new habitat, a new ecosystem.
This new ecosystem would include plantations, the conservation areas, grasslands, and the riparian zones.
So we just got to get rid of this thing, and then we'll probably have a nice little view through here.
And when Sappi decided to set up some motion detection cameras, they found a lot more than the many bird species they already knew about.
The first thing that was interesting was that they're quite large numbers. Wherever we put these cameras, we find a lot of bushbuck, we find a lot of duiker, we find a lot of porcupines, we see a lot of jackal and other predators, a lot of caracal, but things like serval, very common on the plantations. Just about every camera there's a serval walking past.
They even found proof of animals no one expected or even imagined that they occurred in certain areas.
We found brown hyena just north of Howick, not so, just up on the hill here. We've picked up just the other side of the Mgani River side-striped jackal, which is not meant to be here.
They've also found civet in the KZN Midland, which is a species which traditionally is found much further north.
There's a richness of mammal biodiversity in these kind of landscapes. We also know that from some work that was done in Mpumalanga, where we compared the plantations with surrounding agriculture and grasslands, is that the biodiversity, the mammal biodiversity in the plantation habitat is way, way higher than in neighbouring farmland and even in neighbouring grassland, because you're getting these mix of species.
Especially predators are good to find, because they have to have prey around to survive, so that act as indicators of even a wider variety of life being present. And this newfound knowledge is now asking for a whole new approach to how Sappi has to manage their land.
I think we've got to review and relook at the way we look at conservation and the management of these areas. In the past, we wanted to separate, and all our focus was on the little bit of grassland that is left. Those remain important, but we need to look at the estate holistically. And in fact, we need to manage our plantation estate as a unit, not as a bit of grassland, a bit of forest. Let's manage it as a unit, and they all play a role together to make a better habitat.
We could argue that many of these animals are only present because they've run out of space in their preferred environment, because of man's ever-increasing encroachment on the remaining wild areas we still have. But even if that is true, it is good to know that a new ecosystem is forming to help accommodate the biodiversity in nature. And hence, the responsibility that comes with being the owner of a whole ecosystem demands that we stop thinking in segments and take responsibility for the bigger picture, as this may very well be the last stand for a number of these species.